Hi, I'm Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, word of a new development in the long-running fight over the cross on Mount Soledad. We had a weekend of record-setting rainfall, and it's caused headaches for commuters in San Diego and around Southern California.
And I'm Peggy Pico. President Obama's criminal justice reform focus on nonviolent drug offenders in prison. Why it's got some bipartisan support and arguments against it. Plus, this weekend's record rainfall doesn't change the push for drought-tolerant landscapes instead of water-guzzling grass. How California's new regulations will limit lawns in San Diego County.
And we'll take you inside a one-of-a-kind lab investigating crimes against wildlife. Call it Critter CSI. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with word of a deal for the land under the Mount Soledad Cross in La Jolla. The Mount Soledad Veterans Association says it's purchased the land from the Defense Department for $1.4 million. The cross has been controversial for years because it was on public land. Federal courts had ruled it unconstitutional. That may sound like your neighborhood. San Diego got a loud wake-up call over the weekend. This video from Ocean Beach is just a sample of the stormy weather that roared in. We got record rainfall amounts thanks to the remnants of Tropical Storm Dolores. National Weather Service says this is now the wettest July on record. More than 4 inches of rain fell in Ramona over 48 hours, and nearly 3 inches at Vulcan Mountain. Montgomery Field got nearly 2 inches, and just over 1.5 inches reported at San Diego's International Airport downtown. And with the rain came the floods and mud. This video is from Ramona, where flood waters went into some homes. Roads turned into rivers in Ramona and in La Mesa, too. The rain also caused problems for trolley riders today. KPBS reporter Steve Walsh joins us to explain.
Even people who stayed out of their cars were not immune to the problems caused by the storm. The Metropolitan Transit System says flooding stopped some trains briefly over the weekend. By far the most significant stoppage came this morning at 7:15 when a trolley driver noticed a sinkhole developing near the tracks between the Barrio Logan and Harborside stations. Trains were rerouted while crews worked to repair the damage. An MTS spokesman said rerouting the trains created a 15 to 20-minute delay. Crews were working to get the train back on service by the evening commute. Early indications are the sinkhole developed to when a metal pipe collapsed underneath the track. The damage also caused the partial collapse of an access road just beneath the tracks. No cost estimates were available for the damage. MTS will look at a long-term repair in the coming months, which could cause further delays. MTS just finished a 5-year renovation of the Blue Line, which gave the rail line more options to reroute trains to minimize delays. Steve Walsh, KPBS News.
And take a look at this Caltrans video of a collapsed bridge on Interstate 10 between Palm Springs and the Arizona state line. The westbound lanes there were reopened today, but eastbound drivers are being rerouted hundreds of miles out of their way. No word on how long it will take to fix the bridge. The weekend rain helped firefighters contain a wildfire along Interstate 15 in the Cajon Pass. About 20 cars and trucks, as you can see, were burned on Friday when the fire jumped the freeway. It also destroyed 7 homes and burned more than 6 square miles. Pollution alert. The weekend rain sent contaminated runoff out of Baja California and into the South Bay shoreline. Warning signs are posted tonight and will stand until tests show it's safe to go in again. Coastal waters, including Mission Bay and San Diego Bay, should also be avoided for at least 72 hours after the rain. What kind of an impact will the rain have on the drought? Forecasters say it will be minimal. The state will have to wait for several years of normal Sierra snowpack before the drought is broken. Local dams did capture some rain, and reservoirs got more local storage, but still not much of a dent. for the drought. The state's drought restrictions also affect new construction projects. Peggy Pico looks at the impact on developers, homeowners, and San Diego landscapes.
In response to the state's historic drought, the California Water Commission unanimously approved tighter turf regulations to reduce outdoor water use by up to 35%. Here with the new rules and tips on drought-tolerant landscapes are my guest, Matthew Adams, Vice President of San Diego's Building Industry Association, and Nan Sturman, botanist and host of the KPBS television series A Growing Passion. And Matt, what are the new rules on turfs or lawns, and how do they compare to earlier restrictions?
Well, the primary change is that your maximum amount of turf is going to be about 25%. That's a reduction from the 33% that we have had since the last iteration in 2010, plus a requirement for more drip irrigation and micro spraying for new
So
dwellings.
that 25% is part of a total landscape.
Total
and
landscape.
That's for new homes, old homes, businesses. Who does that apply to?
It's primarily for new home construction. If you're going to refurbish your property, and if you're in excess of 2,500 square feet, then the new rules would apply to that as well.
I see. Now, Nan, what are some alternatives to having lawns or turf in your yards, especially for people who don't like cactus?
There is a huge palette, fortunately, that's come on the market slowly over the last several years of low water plants that are perfectly suited to use in our landscapes. In fact, they're better suited for our landscapes than turf, which is exactly the reason for doing all of this.
Because it reduces water. What about the idea that if you change these plants out in the grass, there's going to be more dust or more heat? Is that the case?
Well, there will be more dust and heat if you leave the dirt bare or if you put in rocks or concrete. But if you install plants in place of turf, actually you're probably cooling even more, because the cooling factor comes from the blades themselves, and these larger plants have more leaf surface area, and so they probably cool more.
We just saw some video from the Water Conservancy, so they have a lot of good ideas there, right? In Cuyamaca. All right. Matt, how much water does the state actually want to save under these new restrictions? Because it used to be, I think, 33 or something percent that you could have of a lawn, and now dropping down to 25%?
Now it's 25. It's all in an effort to sort of get at the use of water for landscaping, because statewide it exceeds 50% of all water use is attributed to landscaping, not so much interior. We have been working very hard to improve the water efficiency of new dwelling units, and plus with this movement to multifamily, and compared to single family, you're using less water as well. So the one nut we really have to crack is the landscaping and the outdoor water use, and this is an attempt to do that.
What about some of the arguments against these restrictions? Are you hearing anything of that from maybe turf industry or freedom fighters for lawns, anything like that?
I haven't heard from the lawn freedom fighters.
Right.
Maybe the croquet people, because we don't have as much there. But no, not really, because we've sort of been transitioning into this anyway with the new technologies and drip irrigation, and of course recognizing our responsibility as Californians that we have to be more efficient with the way we use water. And as I said, we've done it inside, and now the focus is to do it on the outside, where you can really get the savings.
And when do the new lawn restrictions, it's for the state of California, when do they take effect?
They take effect December 1st of this year, and it's going to be easier to change your landscaping than your lifestyle, so it's going to be okay.
All right,
It's more than just lawn. I mean, there's components of this model water efficiency landscape ordinance include gray water, includes rainwater capture, and there's a whole lot more to it than just turf.
Right, the gray water, especially after this big rain, of course, people are like, wait, all this water is running off. So we're thinking gray water for personal use, like in the yards, and also citywide?
Well, gray water is the water that comes out of your house after you've used it. We're talking about, so both gray water and rainwater capture, which would be like the rainfall we had yesterday. And yes, I watched it going, gee, I wish I could capture more than that.
I think so many of us in San Diego felt that. Now, what about this idea of, fine, you still want this green lawn, why not replace it with artificial turf, or that fake grass, as a lot of people call it?
We were having this conversation before. Fake grass is fake grass. It's just fake. It doesn't achieve any of the environmental factors that plants do. It doesn't cool the environment. It doesn't sequester oxygen. It needs to be washed. I was telling Matt that I was speaking to the Fallbrook Garden Club recently, and the outside of the community center where I was speaking, they had artificial turf, and it was growing weeds because it needs to be washed. And obviously it had accumulated enough dust that when the weed seeds blew in, they just germinated. There's all kinds of issues with that
other options available.
Please don't go there.
All right, we are out of time. Nan Sturman and Matthew Adams, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peggy.
UC San Diego got a gift today from the wife of the late Ted Geisel, better known as Dr. Seuss, a $3 million donation to fund renovations at the Geisel Library, the main campus library. Visited by more than 1 million users a year, the interior space and lobby will be transformed and new technology will be added. Construction begins in the spring. Gas prices are down for the fourth consecutive day. San Diego GasPrices.com says the lowest in the county, $3.69 a gallon in Chula Vista. The highest, almost $5 a gallon in Coronado and Pacific Beach. Analysts say prices are likely to remain high until repairs are complete at a major refinery in Torrance. Women veterans seeking assistance made up a larger segment of stand down over the weekend. Veterans Village San Diego says there were more children on the field as well. The three-day event concluded Sunday, serving 975 homeless veterans. I spoke with one vet who's been living out of his van for 3 years. He says he was on the verge of suicide just days before stand down started.
I think I'm an extra large now. So,
looking for clothes is a special treat for homeless veterans at Stand Down. 54-year-old Leo Catudio served in both the Air Force and Army, then ended up in prison for several years.
I turned myself in, as a matter of fact.
He was convicted of having sex with a minor after going through a divorce.
I'd say I did things with a teenager that I wasn't supposed to do, and I definitely regret it. And at the time, me and that person, we split amicably and everything, but the law had to do what they had to do.
For 3 years, he's been living out of a van. Leo is one of 2,549 registered sex offenders in San Diego County who live in the shadows. In fact, California has the largest population of registered sex offenders in the country, more than 50,000.
If there are factors that they have in them that could potentially lead to any kind of criminal recidivism, homelessness, we know, exacerbates those factors. It makes all of them worse.
Laura Arnold is a public defender who's been working with veterans like Leo since 2007. After Jessica's law placed new restrictions on them living within 2,000 feet of schools or parks.
The reason I started working with them is because all of a sudden, in mass quantities, they were homeless and they weren't allowed to live anywhere.
Phil Landis with Veterans Village San Diego, the group that puts on Stand Down, says it's a tough situation that still requires compassion.
In our winter shelter, when we were operating the winter shelters, a registered sex offender would be welcome there. In any of our programs where there may be children involved, we can't allow them to participate.
Attorney Arnold says the law needs to be updated like 46 other states who don't label sex offenders for life like California does, without exception.
When you're schizophrenic or PTSD or dealing with many of the mental illnesses, struggling with the substance abuse problems and dementia and brain damage that so many of our veterans are dealing with, these laws are frankly impossible for them to comply with.
And on that note, President Obama visited a federal prison last week as part of a bipartisan push for prison reform. Peggy Pico has the details.
President Obama became the first sitting president to visit a federal prison and speak directly to 6 nonviolent inmates at the El Reno Federal Correction Institution on Thursday. His focus, opportunities for reforming the criminal justice system.
The United States accounts for 5% of the world's population. We account for 25% of the world's inmates.
Here with the San Diego perspective on this national push for reform are my guest, victim rights advocate and former chair of California's Parole Board, Susan Fisher, and Paul Pfingst, former San Diego district attorney. And Paul, Federal prison reform is gaining bipartisan support in California. Among other states, they have some reform already in place here with Proposition 36 and 47. So what do you think this change in attitude toward sentencing appears to be happening? Why?
Well, when I first ran for office to be district attorney in 1994, the #1 issue was crime, the #2 issue was crime, the #3 issue was crime. I didn't test, but I think the #4 issue was crime. People just did not feel safe. As a result, the legislature responded and started putting longer prison sentences on the tab. And ultimately, those chickens have come home to roost with a prison population that exploded. Now the public is trying to address that issue when the #1 issue is no longer crime, and it's not the #2 or #3 or #4 issue. So we have seen crime cut in half. Therefore, the fear of criminals has been cut, and now people are approaching this differently.
Well, during his speech from prison, Obama said a mandatory minimum sentences for drug laws are a major part of the problem. Let's listen.
There's no yeah.
A primary driver of this mass incarceration phenomenon is our drug laws, our mandatory minimum sentencing around drug laws. And we have to consider whether this is the smartest way for us to both control crime and rehabilitate individuals. This is costing.
As a former district attorney, what's your reaction to the president calling to get rid of mandatory minimum sentences for drug users?
If you want to reduce prison populations, that's the place to start, because there are just so many drug offenders inside the federal system. And when you take a look at the mandatory minimums, clearly they're in there for a long period of time. Also close to the president's heart is disproportionate representation in ethnicity inside the prisons, and in the drug laws, that's another good place to start.
Yeah, then Susan, as former chair of the state parole board, what's your take on House Speaker John Boehner's statement that there were many people in prison who just simply don't need to be there?
That was not my experience in California. The people who are in prison in California certainly deserve to be there. As far as the federal prisons, I can't really address that personally. I do know, however, that because someone is in prison for a drug crime does not necessarily mean that they're not at a risk to public safety should they be released at a time that's too soon and without rehabilitation. So if we're going to release people earlier or have shorter sentences for drug offenses, then we need to address those issues as to what's going to happen if they're back out on the street.
Yeah, and this is where the problem really becomes. It's one thing to say we have too many drug offenders in prison, which is fine. But if they're released, they're going to go back to communities who say we have too many drug offenders on the corner. What do we do with them now? They're selling drugs to our kids. They're selling drugs to this. So these folks are going to be either in a prison or back on the street, and how to deal with that is a very big challenge.
That's what I want to ask Susan here. The focus is on reform, as you were mentioning, these nonviolent drug offenders. What kind of support, what would you support as far as like a prison reform issue, or would you support one at all?
Well, I would certainly want to have a lot of facts before I made any kind of a decision. I think that the president walked in, talked to a couple of inmates, and made a blanket statement with no expertise in criminal justice or in rehabilitation issues. And so what my experience was in dealing with people who were violating parole, who were on the street, was that I couldn't make them stay in a drug program. I couldn't make them rehabilitate themselves. They had to decide that they wanted to rehabilitate themselves. So we can put people in drug programs, but we can't necessarily change their behavior.
And I'm going to have to end this here quickly with you, Paul. So what's the potential impact of this reform, either financially or on crime rates, things that you were just mentioning?
Reducing prison population. Many of us are for that. Reducing extreme sentences and bringing them down, doing more of a gradual stepped-up sentence, many before that. The problem becomes if I'm in a poor neighborhood and I'm in a neighborhood beset by drugs and you're releasing these people and they're coming back to me, am I going to be in favor of having them on the corner? And that's always been the yin and the yang of drugs, prison or back on the streets, and who gets them.
Well, we'll be following this closely. Paul Fingston, Susan Fisher, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, you've heard of CSI, crime scene investigators who look into crimes against humans. Now there's a unique lab in the Pacific Northwest handling crimes against wildlife. EarthFix reporter Jess Burns has more from Ashland, Oregon.
Meet the dermestid beetle. Usually at home in the forests of the Northwest, this little critter is on the U.S. government payroll. Its take-home pay is all you can eat.
I'm sure they're pretty hungry. And this is a nice fresh body for them to work on.
Forensic scientists use these flesh-eating beetles to strip animal carcasses down to the bone. The beetles are just one tool used at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Forensics Lab in Ashland, Oregon. It's the only lab in the world dedicated to solving crimes against wildlife. Ken Goddard is the director.
Much like any other police crime laboratory, we do two basic things. We identify evidence. In a triangular fashion, we attempt to link suspect, victim, and crime scene together with that evidence. The big difference in our case is, one, our victim is a non-human animal. Two, we generally don't get a whole animal in. We get pieces, parts, products.
The lab takes cases from across the United States and around the world. It's the official crime lab for CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. The CITES Treaty is the international agreement that governs trafficking of rare plants and animals. Here in the lab, a menagerie of the colorful, the unusual, and the hunted is interspersed among the high-tech equipment of forensic science. The facility features a pathology lab where medical examiners determine how an animal died, a ballistics lab where bullets can be linked to poachers' guns, a genomics lab where DNA testing is done, and a morphology lab where biologists identify the evidence. In fact, that's the most common request they get.
Basically, you would not continue investigation unless you were pretty sure you're dealing with endangered or threatened species. If it's wolf parts, sure, you're going to go after that. If it's coyote fur, probably not.
Because the Ashland lab is the only one of its kind, the onus has been on Goddard and his staff of 15 forensic experts to develop new ways to analyze evidence and secure convictions. Deputy Lab Chief Ed Espinoza has been responsible for many of the innovations in forensic technology and techniques. His latest challenge has been figuring out how to identify species of trees. You might not think of trees as typical wildlife. Illegal logging may not attract the same attention as rhino, tiger, or elephant poaching, but trees are a vital part of any ecosystem, and CITES lists nearly 50 threatened and endangered timber species. U.S. federal agents have begun seizing shipments of illegally trafficked wood, rare species like Brazilian rosewood. It garners a hefty price on the black market and is prized in making furniture and musical instruments. But determining which type of rosewood was used is impossible after the limbs, leaves, and DNA-rich sapwood have been removed.
These two woods are visually and morphologically indistinguishable. They have very similar names. One's called Brazilian rosewood, the other one's called Amazonian rosewood. Most of us, in our head, they become synonymous. The Amazon is Brazil, therefore it's the same thing, right? And so it's kind of a trick in terms of the naming. But one is protected, Delbergia negra, or Brazilian rosewood, is protected, and Delbergia spruciana, or Amazonian rosewood, is not. So the challenge for us is, the scientific challenge, can we separate these two in order to enforce the CITES Treaty?
To do that, Espinoza and his team innovated a way to identify protected species of wood using a technology called a DART mass spectrometer. First, he planes off a small sliver from the evidence sample. Then, he puts the DART to work. The machine ionizes and identifies molecules in the wood, chemical compounds that are unique to a specific species of tree. It then spits out the data.
Each one of these peaks corresponds to a distinct, different molecule that is present in the rosewood. From my experience, I know that this particular peak, which is a compound called caveunine, is specific to Delbergia negra.
Comparing the data to a growing library of chemical signatures, Espinoza can positively identify the wood, and in some cases even determine where the specific tree grew.
Yeah, I think these wood cases are far more important than just the wood. I mean, trees can be regrown. You know, it's pretty easy. It may take a while. You know, you don't get a big redwood replacement in a few years, but they are replaceable. That may not be true for the species that lived in that forest. That may be one of the last survival points. We've got to be really careful about that.
This year, the lab's staff is expanding by about 50%, letting it take on more cases. But Goddard says it will take more than just an increase in manpower.
We made great advances. over this last 25 years, but we've got a long way to go. Law enforcement doesn't resolve issues. The best we can do is hold things at bay, keep them from getting worse until smarter people come along.
Until then, Ken Goddard and his team will keep working sliver by sliver, beetle bite by beetle bite, using innovation and forensic science to bring wildlife traffickers to justice.
Jess Burns of EarthFix, an environmental reporting project made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
I'm Judy Woodruff. On the next NewsHour, rising gun violence leaves much of a city under siege. A weekend on the hot, deadly streets of Chicago. That's Monday on the PBS NewsHour.
We don't see this too often. A rainout at Petco Park. The Padres and the Rockies only got to the 5th inning Sunday before the game was canceled. A makeup game is set for September 10th at Petco, and tickets for yesterday's game will be honored then. No more rain in our forecast for the next several days. Coastal temperatures mostly in the mid to upper 70s. For the inland valleys, upper 70s and low 80s, with a mix of sun and clouds. A bit more sunshine in the mountain areas, temperatures there in the mid 70s. Back to the triple digits for the desert with plenty of sun. Tonight's stories are online at kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.